Rusev. Where does Rusev go next? I would do the whole roll the R's Rusev sort of thing like Lana did when she says his name. Unfortunately, I can't roll my R's, so we're just going to have to go with my terrible pronunciation, Rusev. But that doesn't matter. Where is Rusev going to go next? That's the most important thing, isn't it? Rusev, of course, was one of the names released by WWE in April after WrestleMania on Black Wednesday. A list of many, many, many WWE superstars and producers, employees, talent, and all sorts to be released, furloughed or deemed not essential at that time. His name wasn't the most surprising, even if it was probably the biggest name to be released at the time. It wasn't the most surprising, and I think the reason as to why it wasn't the most surprising is that he hadn't signed a new WWE deal. His deal was set to expire, I believe it was this year or at the start of next year. He'd been vocal about wanting to leave, not being happy with his position, being in negotiations for a new contract, and a deal wasn't signed. So it felt like Rusev was out of the door anyway, or half out of the door anyway. So it wasn't as a massive shock as, say, Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson, that Rusev was released. He was kind of out the door anyway. From what you would see online and what you would see when once he received the news that he was released, it looks to me that he's pretty happy that he's gone from WWE. I mean, you look at his last year with the company. Mainly, it was just the Lana Lashley Rusev thing, wasn't it? Which was just, I mean, what a horrible storyline! What terrible storyline! You had the whole Lana was with Lashley now, and you had the wedding, which actually popped a big number, which is quite mind blowing looking back on it. That at that point, I guess WWE was car crash television. If it's so bad, people will watch kind of mentality. But that whole angle was horrible, and I think the worst part of it now, looking back on it, wasn't necessarily how horrible all the segment was and how horrible the storyline was. The most horrible thing there is that it never got an ending, right? After all of that, after having to sit through all of that, we didn't get a proper ending to it. So that whole storyline, the whole Lana Lashley Rusev storyline, of the Lana Lashley thing, they're kind of, well, they're getting a divorce on television, aren't they now? But I think they're just finished with it. But the Rusev element of it, we never got an ending. So that angle with how bad it was is just the ultimate troll. Right? The ultimate troll. We never really get an ending to it. It's your typical WWE storyline. Currently in his downtime since his release, Rusev has been getting in great shape. Which is something I'm saying about everyone that's been released by WWE, right? Everyone that's been released is just, they look great at the moment. I mentioned Heath Slater on Monday Night Raw the past week. He looks great, looks to be in the shape of his life. You mentioned yesterday, we talked about Mike Bennett potentially going to Impact Wrestling. He looks great. He's definitely in the shape of his life. I mentioned Carl Anderson, Luke Gallows. Luke Gallows certainly, again, looks to be in the shape of his life. And I don't think Rusev is any different here. He spoke recently on Twitch that it's obviously a lot easier. Not only the chip on your shoulder being deemed not essential and not important and being released by WWE, but their schedule isn't obviously what it was when they were on the road. It's a lot easier to stay in shape and get in better shape, and it's just a multitude of factors coming to make you get in this unbelievable shape. So Rusev at the moment looks absolutely great. I mentioned there that he's been on Twitch quite a lot recently. He's been streaming a lot. He's been doing a lot of games. FIFA, he's a big fan of FIFA. I think he's a Real Madrid fan, so that's what it is. And he's been growing his Twitch presence. He's been here on YouTube too. I'll put his channel in the description box below. I believe it's like Miro. His wrestling name going forward will be Miro, as obviously that's his real name. But his YouTube channel is something similar, and the same with Twitch. But his big money, of course, won't be on Twitch and won't be on YouTube. His big money, of course, will be in the ring. So, like with everyone that was released in April after WrestleMania by WWE, the big question is, where will Rusev go next? What company will Rusev landing next? To me, there's three options, right? There's AEW, there's Impact Wrestling, and there's New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, let's break all of these three options down. AEW first. To me, it's the most likely destination. It makes the most sense. to me, I mentioned this, even though Rusev wasn't the most surprising name to be released in April by WWE, he was arguably the biggest name to be let go in April by WWE, right? You look at his initial run in WWE, he was undefeated for what, like a year? Which all led to winning the United States Championship, then facing John Cena, the biggest name in WWE, right? Regardless of if it was in the main event or not at the time, John Cena at that point for me had reached a level of like the Undertaker at WrestleMania. Maybe not exactly to that level, but the point being that if you're facing John Cena at WrestleMania, regardless of if it's in the last match on the card or not, you're part of you're a featured player. You're in the main event. Maybe not on paper, but you're in one of the main events if you're facing John Cena at WrestleMania. John Cena is that big of an attraction even back in 2015 at WrestleMania 31. So he faced John Cena at WrestleMania. Of course he lost. I don't think that surprised anyone. But he had his moment. He had his moment coming into it. He had a lot of steam. I believe he defeated John Cena at Fastlane before WrestleMania 31-2. He made his big entrance in a tank, which people still talk about today. Rusev making his entrance in a tank at WrestleMania 31. He's a great worker. Rusev is incredibly popular with the crowd. Really popular with the crowd. He kind of built up that... I don't know, he kind of built up that somehow this underdog babyface during his the babyface run in WWE. Obviously the whole Rusev Day thing caught on like wildfire and spread like wildfire and became so popular. He sort of became a sort of a Daniel Bryan figure at one point because he just really wasn't getting pushed. He was constantly losing and constantly being beat down and losing that he became this underdog, underground kind of babyface that got so popular in WWE, and they still didn't do anything with him, right? Still didn't do anything with him. But he's popular with the crowd, like I say. He's a draw. He's absolutely a draw. People will say, oh, how can you judge that? Well, they put him in a match at WrestleMania against John Cena. You know, that proves if WWE knows you're a draw, which they did at that point anyway, they'll use you. So he absolutely would be a draw. He's got credibility to his name just for having the WrestleMania match at John Cena alone, but also all of the other stuff, the popularity that he has. The crowd's behind him. Ever since the whole Rusev Day angle, movement, whatever you want to call it, he's always had the crowd behind him without a doubt. Sells a ton of merchandise. Obviously, the whole Rusev Day thing was such a big seller at the time. I don't know if any merchandise he's had since has sold as much. Maybe that was just the gimmick as opposed to the wrestler that was selling the merchandise. It goes back to the Daniel Bryan thing, doesn't it? I remember when Daniel Bryan was getting really, really hot and the yes chants were getting popular. For a long time, WWE actually said that Daniel Bryan wasn't over, the yes chants were over, right? And that was the same thing with Rusev. They were like, oh, Rusev isn't over, just the Rusev Day chants is over. They're one and the same. They're symbiotic. You can't say one is over and one isn't. You can't say, oh, they just like chanting that. He's not over. Well, the reason they like chanting that is because they like him. You know, that's just WWE trying to fit their narrative there of who they want to push and who they don't want to push, right? Daniel Bryan, when he got popular, that wasn't the plan. So WWE, oh no, that's not on our plans. We need to have Randy Orton versus Batista at WrestleMania 30. And it's the same with Rusev. He got popular around, was it WrestleMania 34? That whole Rusev Day thing. And he wasn't even featured into the card. And then eventually he got added into the United States Championship match, which he took the fall in. Which says a lot, doesn't it? So that showed WWE's opinion on Rusev at the time. But I mentioned before that if names like Zack Ryder, Kurt Hawkins, Mike Bennett, Heath Slater, EC3, those names I've spoken about here, if they go to AEW, they in my opinion, they have a few matches on Dynamite. Maybe they have a match against Cody Rhodes for the TNT Championship or something, and then mainly they stay on Dark. And that's their ceiling. They have a ceiling in AEW. And to me, I look at that and I say, well, what's the difference between their position they were in WWE and the position that they're in AEW then? Because they're not appearing on the main show, they're appearing on secondary shows like a main event or whatever. And people say, oh, AEW Dark isn't the same as main event. Well, it's a secondary show. You know, it's not even on the TV, it's on YouTube. So what's the difference between those guys when they're in WWE and they go into AEW? Therefore, it's better off them not to go to AEW, it's better off them to go to an Impact Wrestling or something like that. But in Rusev's case, I don't think that's the case at all. I think if Rusev goes to AEW, he can certainly be a TNT champion, but he could easily be a world champion too. I think Rusev in AEW can be, realistically, he can be anything he wants there, right? So the money is there because Tony Khan and the Khans financially back the company. The spot is there because I think he'd be on Dynamite every single week and he'd be in a featured position. To me, it makes the most sense that he will go there. But I don't think it's a sure thing, but I think it makes the most sense for him. Now, Impact Wrestling. How could Impact Wrestling pull off a deal to sign Rusev? I think it is possible, but I think it's a really, really hard deal for Impact Wrestling to pull off, but I don't think it's impossible. Now, if Rusev signs for Impact Wrestling, you'd have to position him as the face of the company. You'd have to. Just by the star presence and the star power that he has, he would be the biggest star that Impact Wrestling has under contract. It's without a doubt. No one else they've got under contract is facing John Cena at WrestleMania. Right? And I know people are going to say, well, Ken Shamrock, was at WrestleMania. That is true, but that's in 1998, and I don't know if Ken Shamrock's moving the needle like a Rusev would just because of the age factor there. So, to me, if Rusev did sign with Impact Wrestling, he'd be the biggest star that Impact has under contract, without a doubt. If I was in charge in Impact Wrestling and I managed to pull off a deal to sign Rusev, I'd put the world title on him straight away. You'd have to. You would, because he's that big a star. Now, we know that there's a very high chance that EC3, Eric Young, possibly Bully Ray are returning to the company, along with the faction of the Aces and Eights. We know that the World Champions are returning to the company. That's been teased by Impact Wrestling recently on their programming and on their social media. What is the tagline? And a former Impact World Champion is returning and bringing a few friends with him. We've seen the teasers of EC3. We've seen the teasers of Eric Young. We've seen the teasers of other people on social media talking about July 18th. We know that Gallows and Anderson are coming to Impact Wrestling. If Rusev comes in, then Impact Wrestling is bringing in some serious players here. And I think it comes down to the most important thing is what Rusev really wants. I think that's the most important thing here, because if Rusev wants to be a world champion, if Rusev wants to get some momentum, then I think Impact would be a really good move for him. I really do. Perhaps he could even do a bit of a Cody Rhodes, and what by that I mean maybe he could sign a short-term deal with Impact Wrestling, work Impact, become a champion, or at the very, very least, do some big spots and some big shows. He gets over even more. He has even more momentum and more buzz to his name. And then he can go to an AEW, and then he can go to wherever. Because that's what Cody Rhodes did, right? He before he's settled in Ring of Honor and New Japan, he went around pretty much every company. He was all around the indie scene, and he was everywhere, right? Maybe Rusev does the same. Because coming out of that run, for me, Cody Rhodes was a much bigger star than he was going into it. Obviously, Cody Rhodes was Cody Rhodes, and he'd been on WWE TV for 10 years, and at one point was a big star in WWE, but that kind of diminished. It's maybe the same as Rusev. Obviously, Rusev wasn't on WWE television for 10 years, but it's the same kind of principle. So maybe Rusev could do a similar thing there, whereby he signs a short-term deal with Impact and just does a couple of shows. I think that could definitely be a possibility there. But like I said, I think it's a hard deal for Impact to pull off, purely because we have quite a few interested parties here, right? AEW will be interested in Rusev. They just will. They just will. And I know that Impact are well backed by Anthem right now. But if it comes down to a bidding war between an AEW, between an Impact Wrestling, between a New Japan, I don't think you can include people like Ring of Honor and NWA in this, because I don't think they have the finances, and look, we don't know what they're doing in terms of their talent and contracts and shows right now. So if it got between a bidding war between AEW and Impact Wrestling, AEW would win. They just will. And I know that Impact, of course, are actually quite well funded right now when it comes to being owned by Anthem, but we're talking billionaires here. When it comes to the Khans and when it comes to AEW, if they really want someone and they're willing to pay the money to get them, there's not a lot Impact Wrestling can do there. We've seen some of the names that AEW have been linked with in the past. Look, we still might have another Mike Tyson appearance and a Mike Tyson match inside an AEW ring. That's going to cost a pretty penny. Mike Tyson's appearance fee is high, and AEW cannot afford to do that. AEW, of course, were the first people to reach out to Edge before Edge made his return to WWE and made this miraculous return out of retirement. AEW were the first people to reach out to Edge, and apparently they offered him a lot of money. So they have that spending power. They absolutely have that spending power. We've heard those rumors recently about CM Punk, right? I don't know how much stock I put in them. I think it was Conan on his podcast that mentioned that, you know, AEW and CM Punk did have negotiations, which I think is well known at this point. The parties were talking, but CM Punk was requesting an astronomical fee that AEW didn't think was right or anything like that. But to be honest, he knows the people in charge there. He knows what they're worth, and he knows what they have in their pocket. He knows they could probably afford it. It's just worth weighing up whether it's actually worth spending that amount of money. Is he going to be a proven investment on that amount of money they're putting down? So are they going to get the best out of the money for their? You don't know. You really don't know, do you? So that's probably the point where they got to there. But my point being that if it came down to Impact and AEW saying both to Rusev, look, we both want you to come here. If it comes down to just purely money, AEW will win, right? That's just what it is, right? However, I mean, while I think that AEW is the most likely destination for Rusev, I don't think a run in Impact Wrestling for Rusev is completely off the table here. When you look at the momentum that Impact currently has, with the returning wrestlers, with Slammiversary just around the corner, obviously his Rusev's non-compete clause expires at the same time as everyone else, July 18th, or whether or not it actually is July 18th. I say this in every video, but we're not currently sure what date it is. It could be July 15th. Some people have speculated it is July 15th. And those hyping up the July 18th date are actually hyping up the Slammiversary appearance as opposed to their actual non-complete clause expiring. So we'll have to see on that one. But if Rusev wanted to make a bit of buzz, you know, Impact currently has a ton of momentum. They've got returning wrestlers. Slammiversary pay-per-view, he could make a one-off appearance at Slammiversary. Who knows? The buzz on social media around Impact right now is more than it's ever been. Absolutely more than it's ever been. June was the best month that Impact Wrestling has done on YouTube ever. And you think about some of the clips they must have uploaded to there in the past. That says a lot, doesn't it? That shows the people looking at Impact Wrestling, looking for Impact Wrestling, talking about Impact Wrestling right now. This is a place where Rusev could do really great things. And that place, of course, is Impact Wrestling. I think Rusev could do a lot of really good things in Impact Wrestling. He could surprise some people by showing up at Impact Wrestling initially, and possibly even become a bigger star, become a world champion, do what needs to be done to elevate him to a next level. I think it'd be a really, really good opportunity, and it'd be a massive statement from Impact Wrestling, right? It'd be a huge, huge statement if Impact Wrestling managed to pull this off. Because I think, like I said earlier in the video, I think the most likely destination for Rusev is AEW. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. And a lot of people will say, yeah, Rusev to Impact, it's not happening. He's going to AEW. He's just too big a star. If Impact Wrestling managed to pull that off, oh man, it would be a huge statement. It'd be a huge statement and a huge deal to pull off. And I do think it is possible. Like I said, I think it's unlikely, but I do think it's possible. You got to remember, before Chris Jericho signed with the likes of AEW, whilst he was doing the New Japan shots, he was actually in discussions with Don Callis, with Scott D'Amore, about doing a few appearances, maybe 2 or 3 appearances, maybe a match for Impact Wrestling. And then before people would say, well, that's not true, you know, Impact can't afford Chris Jericho. Well, they could. And you've got the factor of Don Callis being a close friend of Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho was very open to working for Impact. His rule about, you know, working in the States or whatever had kind of died by that point, and he was willing to make a splash. And AEW came up, and, you know, the rest right there is history. But so if Impact Wrestling can afford a Chris Jericho, or at least negotiate with a Chris Jericho, that means that an Impact Wrestling can easily at least discuss a potential deal with Rusev, right? So while it's unlikely, I don't think it's impossible. Now, what about Rusev to New Japan Pro Wrestling? Obviously, huge weekend with New Japan right now with Dominion. I won't go into any spoilers or anything like that. But a Rusev deal to New Japan, I think, is certainly possible, and actually, I think it's quite likely. Would it be an exclusive deal? Probably not. Probably not. I think any deal that Rusev, Miro, I don't know what to call him now. Miro? Rusev. We'll call him Rusev. Any deal that Rusev has with New Japan would be centered around any deal that he signs for a North American company. If it's AEW, he'll have the same clause or deal in his contract with AEW that the likes of Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, the Young Bucks, Jon Moxley, Brody Lee, etc., all having their deals, whereby they are allowed to take certain dates with New Japan if it doesn't conflict with their AEW bookings. I think that would be the same here for Rusev if he signed with AEW, and potentially it would be the same for Rusev if he signs with Impact, because if Rusev signs with Impact Wrestling, it will likely be the same deal. And the reason why we know that would be a possibility is you have to look at Luke Gallows and Kyle Anderson, right? Luke Gallows and Kyle Anderson have signed with Impact Wrestling, but have also been allowed by the company to agree deals with New Japan Pro Wrestling once they can safely and comfortably do so. Gallows and Anderson will work the Impact Wrestling dates around their New Japan Pro Wrestling dates, and the company have agreed to facilitate that. So this would likely be the same with Impact Wrestling too. So Rusev's desire, if he wants to go to Japan and work for New Japan Pro Wrestling, wouldn't be hindered. Yeah, that wouldn't hinder an Impact Wrestling deal. That wouldn't change anything like that. If Impact really want to sign Rusev, they'll facilitate anything he wants, whether it's working for New Japan Pro Wrestling, whether it's twitching on a Wednesday night or whatever. If it's plugging his Twitch streams and channels during a pay-per-view. If they really want him, they'll do what they can. They'll bend over backwards to get him because he's that big a star. So it would likely be the same element if Rusev signs for Impact Wrestling or AEW at that point. But the whole New Japan issue right now is that for wrestlers based outside of Japan, it's really hard to travel there, isn't it? Because of the travel restrictions, because of quarantine, because if you travel to a certain country, you have to have a mandatory self-isolation of a couple of weeks after travel, etc. So wrestlers going back and forth from North America to Japan at the moment is just very hard anyway. And besides, New Japan, I don't know if this is still the case, it certainly was a couple of weeks ago, New Japan are on a hiring freeze right now, from what I believe. Obviously, they can still agree deals verbally or in principle. We've seen that in the case with Luke Gallows and Kyle Anderson. Penn hasn't touched paper when it comes to their deals with New Japan, but it's already been agreed with the bookers there and the people in charge that they're coming back. It's more of a verbal deal. So Rusev in Japan, I mean, it's a bit of a mouth-watering prospect, really, isn't it? I think Rusev in Japan is just a great fit. It's just a real great fit. He can be the beloved babyface that Rusev has achieved very well in WWE. I don't know how much of a babyface he would be in Japan because the crowd's more reserved. I think the best thing for him to do if he went to Japan would be, the foreign heel. He can play up the Bulgaria background. His style, his stiff nature, his look. I just think he'd be such a big star in Japan. I think he'd be a massive, massive star in Japan. He'd make great money in Japan. And with the contracts that he could potentially have with either AEW or Impact Wrestling, he could make some serious money and not have to do the travel all the time. That was the biggest problem with AJ Styles, Luke Gallows, Kyle Anderson back in the day when they were part of the Bullet Club, is they would say, those tours of Japan were just brutal, absolutely brutal, because they were still based in, not as much Kyle Anderson, but Luke Gallows and AJ Styles were still based in America. AJ Styles certainly, and those travels to Japan, those tours of Japan were just absolutely brutal, whereas I don't think Rusev would have to do that. Rusev would fall into the category of a Chris Jericho, of a Jon Moxley, that would come in for the big shows, work some matches that would get a lot of hype, and do well there. But they wouldn't be doing the trips all the time. Potentially, I don't know what the status is with New Japan in terms of their American expansion at the moment, but they also probably be working quite a few of the New Japan America shows. Obviously, New Japan had planned to do this whole New Japan USA extension, extension into the United States, but obviously with COVID and the pandemic and all of that sort of stuff, that's just off the table right now, as are a lot of things. But it's a really interesting one. Like I said, I think Rusev to AEW here, it's the most likely destination. It makes the most sense. So I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we see Rusev show up in AEW. Not too far off, actually. I mean, it's what? Slammiversary is like a week or 6 days away at the time of recording in here. So his non-compete clause is going to expire next week. Will he show up at Slammiversary? You know, I just don't think so. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Could you imagine the buzz on social media if Rusev was revealed as the fourth man at Slammiversary in the Impact World Championship match? It would be massive. It would be huge. But I don't think that is going to be the case. I'd be great if it was, right? It'd be amazing if it was. I'm still going to go with my prediction that the fourth man at Slammiversary in the Impact World Championship Fatal 4-Way match for the vacant Impact World Championship, I still think that will be EC3. Followed by, if it's not EC3, I think it'll be either Eric Young or Bully Ray. I'd love for it to be Bully Ray, but I think most likely it's going to be EC3. I just don't see the movements currently, there's no smoke here on social media or online that Rusev has even discussed with anyone, I think. And if he has had discussions with anyone, it would likely be over at AEW, over Impact Wrestling. But like I mentioned earlier in the video, that doesn't mean, to me anyway, that the deal is impossible to do for Impact Wrestling. I think if Impact Wrestling really, really, really wanted to get this deal done, they absolutely could. They absolutely could. And should they get it done, it'd be a massive statement. It'd be a huge statement by Impact Wrestling if they managed to pull this deal off. So maybe watch this space. As I mentioned, I think the most likely destination for Rusev, I think it's an AEW contract with a possible New Japan Pro Wrestling run in the future. But let's not rule out Impact Wrestling yet, right? Anything can happen. If this year has proved to us anything, if 2020 has proved us anything, not just in professional wrestling, but in the world in general, right? If anything that can happen, and we shouldn't rule out anything. But it certainly is an interesting time for all three companies, but it certainly is an interesting time for Impact Wrestling. Huge week for Impact Wrestling coming up over the next week. So I'll be sure to do videos about all the fun stuff heading into Slammiversary predictions, reviews, all of that good stuff. It'll be here on the channel, so be sure to check that out. But as always, here on the channel, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts about Rusev? Where do you think he will end up next? Do you think he'll end up in AEW? Do you think he'll go to Impact Wrestling? Do you think he'll end up in New Japan Pro Wrestling? Do you think we could even get a Rusev appearance at Slammiversary on Saturday, July 18th? Let me know your thoughts about Rusev's future destination and where you would like to see him go in the comment section below. I'll be sure to interact with all of you down there. I really enjoy chatting with you in the comment section here. Everyone's welcome on this channel. We're just here to talk about wrestling, right? It's not about agendas or anything like that. We're not pro one company and against another company. It's just opinions here, and that's what makes pro wrestling so great. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms that are on the screen right now. It's at 365 Wrestle on Twitter and at Wrestle News 365 on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.